Either they love you, or they hate you, or they gon' judge you. It is what it is. It is what it is. It is what it is. It is what it is.
Welcome back to another great episode of Lingo Ink's Open Minds, where we talk about progressive topics and issues going on with the collective. Today we have a magnificent show, childhood trauma, healing the inner child. A lot of things stem from, I would say generational trauma, but everything comes back to self. So it's where we're at as children and the trauma and things that we had to deal with family, friends, society, and we're here to speak about it with two magnificent guests. First guest we have is Aiden B. Asher. He's a medical medium life coach. He deals with a whole bunch of other modalities and stuff like that. And then we have the master of knowing nothing, but he knows a lot. Trust and believe. And you can check him out on Instagram at Balance Seeker. And then on the description on this video, you can connect with Aiden. All right. So I want everybody to welcome them to the show. All right, before we start, just want to let y'all know this show episode is brought to you by www.lingoinkboutique.com. Right now, you're seeing the 999 Synchronicity lines. So go ahead and tap in with that and a whole bunch of other apparel for men, women, and children. Make sure y'all subscribe, like, and comment. If anything resonates with you, definitely check these gentlemen out. If anything resonates with you at home, we shall begin. Aiden, we'll start off with you. Tell us your journey as far as acknowledging childhood trauma and your beginnings and where you've gone through in life and to how you was able to heal your inner child.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thank you for the introduction. Blessed to be here, share this experience with everybody, share my story, share the tale that unfolded far enough to get me to this point. Just want to make sure, it's been a journey for sure. This whole thing started with fitness, with wanting to be a bodybuilder. That's where I began. Never really questioned as to why I wanted to be a bodybuilder. I just remember seeing Arnold posters on the walls when my dad would come back from the city where we used to live in Belarus, and he would bring just like movies from Hollywood and show me them, and I would see all the Arnold movies, Rambo, Mortal Kombat, stuff like that, and I would see these guys there that were just like muscular and very manly and like doing things that I always wanted to do, and I never questioned any of it. Just saw that all of the attention would go to that. So I was like, okay, if I want to get attention from my dad, or if I want to be approved in his eyes, then that's what I gotta look like, and that's what I gotta do. So eventually, when we came to America, and these weren't conscious, these were unconscious thoughts completely. When we came to America, eventually, I believe it was right around the age of 16 after my parents had split up. They broke up at the age, I was about 10 years old when everything was like really at its climax. I remember nights just laying in bed when I would just be hearing the violence across the wall and just begging to myself that they would just split up. And it was a continuous relationship like that with them. Like, they were always arguing, always fighting. There was never any kind of peace in the house, and I found myself never really wanting to spend time home unless it was either by myself alone or it was just one of them in the apartment. Otherwise, I wouldn't be home at all. I remember I actually skipped school for like 3 months straight. Just did not go to school because I was kind of just like, what's the point of any of this? Felt that perhaps it was a rebellion. Yeah, it was definitely a rebellious stage in life where I just didn't show up to those things. And eventually, when they broke up, I remember my mom asking me who I wanted to go with, and I was looking at this woman in her eyes, and I knew full well I did not want to go with her. Not because of anything against her, I just never felt home with my mom. I felt it was more of like a cold presence. When I felt with my dad, I never really had a good relationship with him anyway. We never really had any relationship, but when I was in his presence, just physically, I just felt I could just do whatever. I could just be me. But with my mom, there was some like tension, and it was weird. But I love women, so that was also another thing that I had to question eventually. I was like, am I gay? No, it was nothing to do with that. Went through that whole little bit as well, but eventually I got into bodybuilding. At the age of 16, started to really take it seriously because my mom married someone who was a really bigger guy. He had these huge arms, and I realized that okay, my mom went for the bigger guy, and she wasn't standing up for me when him and I would get into altercations. We would get into verbal arguments. One time we almost practically got into a fist fight, but I didn't have anybody standing up for me, so I realized that I had to stand up for myself. And I really don't like fighting. I don't like fist fights. I don't like to hurt anybody. Of course, if it's necessary, then it comes down to it. It does, but I was never one to start a fight, never one to like any of those things. So I was naturally drawn to something like bodybuilding because I figured that if I appeared big enough, then nobody would want to fight with me, and I could just avoid that altogether. And so I started looking at all the magazines and started to like look at proportions and physiques, and started to go to the gym a lot more. I spend all my time after school at the gymnasium, just training for hours until they closed. I started to get into things like pro hormones very young age. Like I had this friend who was a wrestler, and he started to hand me pro hormones at the age of 16, and I started to pop those like Pez candy and put on like 30 pounds in a month. Not healthy weight by any means, because I was just putting anything in me, like any kind of calories I could find. By the time I was 18, I graduated high school, and this was after going to 3 different high schools. I went to 2 different high schools. Went to 2 different high schools in New York. Then I went to, 4 different high schools. I went to 2 different high schools in New York. Then I went to a third one in New Jersey. And then when I moved out at the age of 16, because I just couldn't live with my mom or my stepdad anymore, I went to Michigan where my dad was, and I graduated from high school in Michigan. I realized that the environment where I was living with my mom and my stepdad, it was very ego-based, very controlling, and it was just not in alignment with anything that I stand for, with who I am. And so at 16, I moved out. Then with my dad, it was like a lot more sense of freedom, although it had its own toxicity as well. Eventually, by the age of 20, when I was already from age of 18 to 20, I was already pretty deeply involved in weightlifting and going to the gym on a regular, consistent basis. I already did my first competition. But then at 20, I signed up for the military. I went to the Navy, and I got married. So I was in the military, in the Navy for 4 years, married. And while I was married to this person, even before I got married to the person, like I had all these red flags that were just being shown to me very blatantly, like very straightforward. This is not the person for you. But I was completely disregarding them and went forward with marrying this person anyway. Moved her in with me in Florida where I was stationed. It was under this belief that I could make someone happy, that it was my responsibility to do so to begin with. When I moved her in with me, no matter what I did, no matter how romantic I presented myself, or no matter the act, the person was still the person with their beliefs, their traumas, their were at that time. There was nothing I could do, and it felt like I was exhausting myself energetically while still holding on to this like belief that I can change this person. I can make them happy. About a month in, she ended up cheating on me, but then it was disclosed that she had already been cheating on me with like all these people. And this was a month into being married and having moved in together. There was a part of me that was like, damn, like this is exactly what happened with my parents. And there was another part of me that was like, you know what, even though this did happen with my parents, it's going to be different, and I'm going to make it work. Emphasis on the word make. So it was all just continuing with the ego, like I'm going to make this work, like no matter what, like I'm not going to see it for what it is. And so I continued bodybuilding during my entire military years, for 4 years, and I continued in the marriage, although I stayed in that marriage simply because there was a part of me that was trying to make it work, yes, and also because the military would pay like triple for people that are married, and I was very controlled by the fact that I was getting paid to be in the military, and I was getting paid that much more to be in the military and be married. The money was completely controlling me because I was so brainwashed and unconscious at that point. I just didn't see myself in any kind of way. Like I knew, I was like, you know, this doesn't feel exactly right, but the money is so good. So I just stayed in it. The marriage fell apart within a month after it began. However, I stayed kept myself in the toxicity of it during the whole time. I got to really, really learn through that experience what trauma looks like. I got to really experience what toxicity looks like in a relationship. I got to really experience what my parents went through in their relationship through it as well. Of course, eventually, when I got out of the military, about 3 bodybuilding shows later, we ended up getting a divorce, split up, and I went on a whole different path. It felt as if I got like released from my cage while I was in the military, because I couldn't really go and do things that normal, quote unquote, what the military called normal people or civilians. I couldn't do those things. Like I felt very sheltered as a human. And so when I got out, I remember a friend of mine, he asked me to go to EDM festival with him. And I was like, no, that's not me. I don't do these things. I'm just bodybuilding. I don't do the festival stuff. I don't do the EDM music. I like rock. I was very non-malleable in my ways of thinking and approaching things. And so eventually, though, he broke through, and it was still while I continued bodybuilding this whole time, not really seeing what was really going on with myself. I was just very, very ego-driven at the time, and very driven by the underlying emotion. I just didn't even realize we're driving. It was all a very unconscious surface life. So I eventually got into raves, got into the whole EDM culture, the party scene. Tons of drugs were involved. Got into dealing ganja, dealing steroids. I got into doing all these things that I had no business doing. And this was back when I was really young, like fresh out the military, didn't know myself, 24 to the age of 26. Continued that way until 26. I had an experience where it was either I choose to live a life of value and meaning and let go of the life that I was living, or I would have died. I would have chosen to allow myself to die at that point. And so I chose to have a meaningful life, to create a meaningful life, to live a life that it means something that I value. So by choosing that, I left where I was and I went back to New Jersey. I started a meal prep company, mainly because I was learning about how to start a business, how to make money, without really getting to know myself spiritually. I knew myself physically, I knew myself mentally, but I did not know myself spiritually on a soul basis. I was all about how do I make money, I gotta make money. And I had this vision in my mind that like I would drive up to my parents' house one by one, of course, because they got divorced, and I would have this super sick car that I would just be like, look at this car I have. Kind of like I was obviously experiencing a lot of pain and trauma and like a lot of hurt that I wanted to express through that action by showing them how successful I got in spite of them. Like I wasn't empathetic to them and what they were going through and the pain and the suffering that they were experiencing internally, because I was blocked off to my own. When I experienced the moment when my ex-wife opened up and told me that she cheated on me, it was like this eruption, this internal eruption of emotions in my heart that I felt I would rather be shot in the head, honestly, than experience that kind of pain ever again. It felt like my heart exploded and imploded at the same time. And that was the worst pain ever. And that pain, that was what drove me through everything. It drove me through the grueling insanity workouts that I would put myself through, because I would internally be telling myself that I was healed, even though I was going through some kind of physical pain in the gym and through the reps and with the crazy weight, and it would burn so much. But in my mind, it was just going that this is not anything compared to what I have experienced already. There is a pain that I know that is beyond this, and it was like, this doesn't even matter. And that was what I built my body with. It was with the pain. It was with that anger. That was a driving force for bodybuilding. That was a driving force for business. It was a driving force for literally everything. Thought that enough time had passed since the marriage. I had started the business and it was going very successfully. I was running it out of a 1-bedroom apartment. I would meal prep for people and I would do their nutrition individually in every meal, and they would know that this meal I eat at this time because it has these specific nutrients in it. I would know that this meal I would eat after this workout. I would eat this meal on my rest day at this time. Like everything was done for each person where it's not just their diet was written out, but they knew exactly when to eat what because I made it. Like it was as if I wrote out their diet and they physically had it as well with the meals. So I was doing really well with that, making really great money. It felt as if I was like, this can't be legal, because I was making close to the same amount of money that I was when the drug dealing was going on. So it was like, it felt really good to be doing something of value for someone while receiving the money on the returning aspect of things, while knowing that it's a completely legal transaction. Like, I didn't have to worry about anything. Eventually, I thought that enough time had passed from that marriage, and I met someone else, and I thought that I did the work on myself. I was like, I have, I got money coming in. I was bodybuilding still, and I had my own place, and I was like, oh, about 3 years or something like that had passed. I'm like, that's long enough time. I can be in a relationship now. I'm healed. And so I got into a relationship with this person, and off the go, just as if nothing had ever changed. From day one, it was just not healthy from the go. The more we stayed together, the more I felt that like I had this internal connection with myself, and intuition was just every day like, no, 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 and by the way, no. But I would just completely go against it and not listen to it, because I was afraid of, honestly, the scariest thing for me was being with myself. The scariest thing for me was to actually know who I am, and to know that with or without this person, I'm okay. And because my entire life up until that point, up until a very recent point, actually earlier last year, I was just running from myself completely. Through that relationship, it forced me to look at myself. It forced me to see all of the shadow, the dark parts of myself, that, not to say dark in a way where it's bad, but just the dark parts of myself that I wasn't willing to accept and embrace myself as a whole human being. So it was the best of times, and it was the worst of times, in a full spectrum both ways. And I got to really understand my parents through that relationship, especially even more so than the marriage, because that relationship I was more conscious, more awake to things spiritually. When that relationship was, I'd say, at its climax, I realized that her and I were completely playing out my parents. She was my mom, I was my dad. The reason that we even were together was the same. It was all completely ego-based. It was all surface-based. It was very one-sided. There wasn't, I'll fill your cup by filling mine, and vice versa. It was, I'm going to exhaust and expand myself to the point I can no longer even help myself, because that's how far both of us would go for one another and forget ourselves completely. It was a very traumatic experience, because it was as if both of us had this like soul contract that we were fulfilling through one another's interaction. It felt as if neither of us could let go. We both knew that like we were toxic completely for one another, but neither of us could let go up until like had to happen in order for that to take place. And eventually it did. I began to realize that the relationship was held together through physical matters. Like, if we didn't have sex, there would be no relationship. I realized that. And I realized that the driving force for the sex at that point was that I was on so many different steroids, because I was consistently trying to upkeep an image for the sake of, I'll call it society, but really it was for the sake of myself feeling that I was approved of, that I was accepted, that I was deemed okay in the eyes of quote unquote others. I realized that that was the only way that I could end the relationship, was by not even being able to, not even wanting to have sex. So I realized that I needed to get off the hormones. And so I cold turkey went off of everything after almost a decade of being on all the hormones. And so I cold turkey went off everything, and I knew it was going to be pure hell, and I was going through like a lot of mental things when I did that. Psychosis, depersonalization, you name it. I felt like I was a human walking time bomb completely, in every sense of the word. It was horrible, but it worked. It worked in the sense that because I had no desire, nor could I as a human perform anymore, not without some sort of like aid, like taking a Viagra or taking more testosterone or something. I just couldn't do anything. And so eventually that led to us detaching from one another. Eventually I moved out to Los Angeles, California, really did the work on myself out here, even more so than where I was before that in New Jersey. I started to realize that people would naturally just gravitate towards me and tell me about their relationships, that they're currently going through their issues that they're experiencing with their partner or with themselves, the things that they're not able to do because the situations that they're in. And it all always connected with some sort of unconscious trauma that they would be playing out in their current realities. Well, they would be projecting their trauma in their current reality because unprocessed trauma that's stored either in the psyche or in the body. Either way, it's in the body somewhere. If it's unprocessed, it will eventually find its way to show itself to the individual in order for the individual to heal it, to process it somehow, to understand it, accept it, embrace it in a way that it didn't get the chance to, so that the person can be free of it. That's the real purpose of it. A lot of the time that trauma, it goes back to childhood, because a lot of people will experience something in their adult life or even in their teen life or whenever it may be. It could be even in their later years when the person's 50, 60 and onwards, and it'll still be back to childhood. And most of the time also it'll be connected to their ancestors, people that came before them, because it was just blindly and unconsciously passed on. Been connecting with a lot of people that way, and while I was healing myself, I still am. I feel that we're always on a consistent basis of healing. Just it gets easier while in the same sense we're getting stronger by doing it. I would naturally reflect for them what they're going through so that they can better understand themselves and release that tension, release that emotion from within themselves, and have more self-acceptance, more self-love, understand their parents, understand their grandparents, understand their relationships that they're going through or went through, so they can have internal peace with things.
So it's interesting because we all heard your journey and a lot of us could relate. And if you think about children, right? When we're children, we're sponges. So we see and we say things that we see and feel and hear, right? And our parents, they may unknowingly may be doing things that's projecting through their own childhood trauma. You see what I'm saying? So now it goes from their own childhood trauma that they probably haven't healed from. Now it projects on to their children, which now they're gonna go through their own childhood trauma, because it's like a cycle that's going on. And that's a generational trauma, right? So it's very interesting when you were speaking about your journey that you kind of seen that cycle continuing on with you and your spouse. You see what I'm saying? Because what you've known, even though we attempt to try to make it better, is what happened with your parents. So you start seeing like, whoa, this is getting kind of trippy, kind of Twilight Zone-ish, because you start seeing certain things even in your own relationships with other people playing out that type of way. For you to acknowledge later on through trauma, I guess, and what do they call it, trauma bonding?
Yeah.
For us to learn, what could you say to the people that you've acknowledged, even though going through these things, that it actually stemmed from your childhood? Like, wow, this is really something that you may have not healed from since being a child.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things would definitely be the fact that initially I was very drawn to music. I was very drawn to, I grew up on Queen, the group, and I've always carried a guitar around with me, like a little toy guitar, since I was like age, I don't know when I got this thing first, like 2-3 years old. And I would carry this thing around with me all the time because I saw my dad would play the guitar for me. He would like play me to sleep. It always just like my heart felt really good when he would do that, and I've always wanted to learn to play guitar, so I would always like carry it and like kind of like mess with it on my own. But I was 3 years old, you know. I always wanted to sing also, but I was under the impression that my vocal expression was causing disturbance in the home, because there was always fighting and I never felt comfortable to speak. It wasn't anything like vulgar or anything, but I was asking my mom a lot of questions, and she was going through her own thing. And it wasn't like, oh my God, like she like verbally like abused me to the point where I was like just scarred for life. But it was like even something really little, where, because it could be anything, to where when a child feels some sort of trauma occurred and then like it's stored, It doesn't get expressed asked in that moment of if I would have asked like what's going on, why are you experiencing like the emotional state you're in. Of course, I was 3 years old. There was no way for me to express that. But nonetheless, because of that, I held on to this belief that if I speak, then people around me will not be happy, basically. Eventually took me off course for music, and it put me on course for bodybuilding, which I never wanted to go to the gym. I had to be afraid. I had to go in the path of fear to go to the gym. I had to go to steroids and pro hormones in order to want to go to the gym. It was never something that I was inherently drawn to naturally. Only after I was no longer able to go to the gym and I got to step away from it that I realized that like, fuck, wow, like I went all that way when actually I wanted to go that way, which was with music. It was due to the trauma that experienced at a very, really early age. What's more is that bit about wanting to express myself through music and how that ties back to childhood. I recently realized that the biggest reason why I didn't go to music and went to bodybuilding instead was, yes, the trauma from those things, while at the same time I felt that I wasn't encouraged and supported by my parents because they just weren't present with me because they weren't present with themselves. They weren't encouraged and supported as children in their households. And therefore, they could not encourage and support me the way that I or anybody really would need to. They were filled with doubts and worries and negativities. And so that was really the way that they would express themselves as well. What that ultimately taught me was that, yes, I learned about the trauma, I learned about what they went through, I learned about what I went through. While the biggest lesson takeaway from that was, even if and or when someone doesn't believe in us or someone doesn't encourage us or support us, that the most important thing is that we support ourselves, we encourage ourselves, and that we are there for ourselves. Because at the end of the day, anybody can tell us that, you'll be the best guitarist, you'll be the best singer, you'll be this music star, whatever it may be, bodybuilder. But if we don't believe that to be true for ourselves to begin with, it'll never happen.
That's amazing. And sometimes we have to go through things to get those lessons for ourselves. And as you can see here, this is Aiden in the gym, so that energy has to go somewhere, and he focused on bodybuilding. And he's done pretty well in it. But he learned for himself where all this energy was going to and why he took it to that point. Now we have Nori, N-U-R-I.
Yes, sir.
Don't get him mistaken for N-O-R-E, okay? This is Nori here. He's a younger gentleman, and what I love about this episode is because we have the divine masculine here, and we're speaking about ourselves, our childhood traumas. This is stuff that we don't usually speak about, especially in public. We're all taught to be tough and machismo, I want you to tell the people, like, your journey and your experience as far as growing up and realizing the childhood trauma for yourself and healing your inner child to be where you at today.
Okay. So for me, man, it's been a very interesting journey, man. I'm not sure where to start. I want to say that I grew up in a toxic home, very toxic home, man. I've used that as like a blueprint. I've used that as a blueprint. I've used all the trauma, parent-based trauma, all these things that I've went through as a blueprint for my life. And with that being said, it's like, man, my parents weren't taught how to love. They weren't taught specific things, right? I'm starting with them solely on the fact that I have picked up a lot of their traits. And with that being said, it's kind of like I've carried a lot of weight. And a lot of that weight didn't stem from me from the beginning. How do I put this? I believe that I've been stuck in a world, right? Like stuck in a world of pressure and in a world of conformity, in a world of, man, we have to be a specific way.
Just let it flow, bro. You good? You cool? You good?
Yeah. I joined the military. I followed a lot of people within my lifetime, right? And I feel like I'm still on this journey of discovery. I'm still on this journey of discovery of me. And with that being said, it's like, man, I'm still shedding skin, right? I've come to the realization that I haven't been living for myself. I've been living for other people. And where that stems from, again, it's parental based. It's one of those things, man. I've seen my dad. My dad's very masculine man. He's very tough dude. And with that being said, man, if you ever step to him the wrong way, it's kind of like he cuts you off. So I picked up these things. I think that for me was learning about forgiveness, right? Because you guys, this is big for me. This is big for me. This is kind of me stepping into my own light, in my own power, in a sense, right? I'm doing this podcast. I don't really share my story like that, and it's because at the end of the day, man, we all have something, right? We all have something that we have went through, and to just put it out there into the world, it's a big thing. I apologize, man, if I don't get this off the right way.
You. Either they love you, or they hate you, or they gon' judge you. It is what it is. 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 Being your own, living your truth. All these egos and pride got something to prove. I got my diva inside, cooped in a coop. Keep your feelings inside. I do what I do. I move how I move. Choose what I choose. Third eye's active in motion. Magnificent views. There's too many options. So much to choose. What is for me is just not what's for you. Vice versa. Let it all go. Most of it's not worth it. Just stay focused on your goals and life purpose. Be a student of this life and never stop learning. Never stop learning. Nah, there's some shit you just gotta accept. Your reality is created by the thoughts in your head. You. It's just how you like love. Right before you young. It's just how you like.
Focus.
My mama told me stay focused.
My girl told me stay focused.
My girl told me stay focused.
My homie told me stay focused. Fuck what them haters say. Keep stacking that paper and kick them doors wide open.
Doors wide open.